The businessman's daughters wouldn't stop crying, but the flight attendant's whisper changed everything. Richard Thompson watched his two daughters dissolving into tears as the private jet cut through the clouds toward the interior of Pennsylvania. 6 months ago, he had made the most difficult decision of his life, and now he was taking Emily and Sophie to live with their maternal grandmother in Lancaster. That's when he felt a gentle touch on his shoulder. Turning around, he saw flight attendant Carol approaching with a kind smile that contrasted with the tense atmosphere of the cabin. "Mr. Thompson, may I speak with your daughters for a moment?" she asked, discreetly pointing to Sophie, the youngest, who was sobbing non-stop. Richard hesitated. He wasn't used to letting strangers approach the girls, especially at such a delicate moment. But something in Carol's understanding gaze made him agree with a nod. The flight attendant crouched down to Sophie's level, who was only 8 years old. Her brown hair was stuck to her face, wet with tears. "Hi, Princess. What's your name?" whispered Carol in a sweet voice. "Sophie," the girl replied between sobs. "Sophie, what a beautiful name. You know, I also lived with my grandmother when I was little. It was one of the best times of my life." Something magical happened. Sophie's tears stopped immediately, as if a button had been turned off. She raised her red eyes and fixed her gaze on Carol with a genuine curiosity that even surprised Richard. "Really?" asked Sophie, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Really? My grandmother Evelyn made the best sugar bread in the world, and she taught me how to make corn husk dolls." Emily, the older one at 10 years old, also stopped crying and leaned in to listen better. Richard noticed that his daughters were more interested in the conversation with that stranger than in anything he had tried to say over the past few months. "Daddy said we're going to live with Grandma Catherine because he can't take care of us anymore," said Emily with a disturbing maturity for her age. Carol exchanged a quick glance with Richard, who looked away toward the window. The businessman had built an empire in the mining industry, but now he felt completely lost with 2 children. "And do you believe that?" asked Carol, sitting in the seat in front of the girls. Sophie shook her head vigorously. "No, Daddy can do anything. He's the strongest man in the world." "Then why do you think you're leaving?" insisted Carol. The 2 girls exchanged a look with a complicity that caught the flight attendant's attention. There was something there, a silent communication between sisters that hid a secret. "Because we did something very bad," whispered Emily, tears starting to flow again. "And now Daddy doesn't want us at home anymore." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Richard felt as if he had been punched in the stomach. He quickly turned to his daughters. "What do you mean you did something bad? You've never done anything wrong in your lives." "Yes, we did, Daddy," said Sophie, her small voice breaking the heart of anyone listening. "We made you and Mommy fight." The silence that fell in the cabin was deafening. Only the roar of the jet engines broke the tension hanging in the air. Carol realized she had touched on something much deeper than she had imagined. "Girls, can you tell me what happened?" asked Carol, her professional voice giving way to a maternal tone. Emily pulled a crumpled letter from her jacket pocket. The paper was visibly handled, folded and refolded several times. "We read the letter that Mum sent to Dad," admitted Emily, the words coming out like a painful confession. Richard Thompson paled. He knew exactly which letter they were talking about. Margaret's last attempt to save the marriage, where she begged for them to talk about their problems before it was too late. "And what did the letter say?" asked Carol gently. "That Mum was very sad because Dad didn't talk to her anymore," said Sophie, "and that she missed when we were a happy family. But it also said that if Dad didn't want to try anymore, she would leave so she wouldn't make anyone else suffer," Emily finished. Carol observed Richard, who had covered his face with his hands. The businessman was clearly struggling with his own emotions. "And you think you're to blame because of this letter?" asked Carol. "We always fought during dinner," explained Emily, "and Dad would get nervous when we made noise in his office. One day I spilled ink on Dad's important folder," confessed Sophie, "and he yelled a lot. Then Mom and he had a big fight. Then Mom left and never came back," concluded Emily. Richard finally raised his head, his red eyes meeting his daughter's. "Girls, you need to understand something. Mom and Dad separated because of adult problems. You were never ever to blame for anything. But if we were better behaved, began Sophie. No, interrupted Richard, his voice firmer than it had been in months. You are the most wonderful children there are. The problem was mine, not yours. Carol realized she was witnessing something very intimate, but also felt that her presence there was no coincidence. There was something more to that story. Mr. Thompson, may I ask a question? Why specifically now are you going to Lancaster? Richard hesitated before answering. Because I need to resolve some problems at the company. Serious problems, and I can't expose the girls to that. What kind of problems? Insisted Carol. Someone in my own company is sabotaging our contracts. We lost 3 important bids last month. If I don't find out who it is, I'll have to fire half the employees. Carol felt something familiar in that situation. Working as a flight attendant for 15 years, she had developed a sharp intuition for people and their stories. Did you ever talk to your wife about these problems? Ex-wife, Richard corrected automatically. And no, Margaret never took an interest in the family business. Emily and Sophie exchanged that knowing look again. Dad, Mom always asked about your work, said Emily timidly. And when Mr. Jack was fired, she was very sad, added Sophie. Richard turned to his daughters, surprised. How do you know about Jack? Because Mum went to visit his family when he was out of work, explained Emily. She brought food and money to help. The revelation hit Richard like a bolt of lightning. Jack had been his right-hand man at the company for over 10 years. Richard had fired him when he discovered that some contracts were being leaked to competitors, and all the evidence pointed to him. Mum said that Mr. Jack was suffering a lot because he couldn't prove he was innocent, continued Sophie, and that there were other employees who were doing bad things in secret, added Emily. Carol watched the shocked expression on Richard's face. The pieces of a puzzle were starting to come together. Your wife, ex-wife, was investigating on her own? Asked Carol. I don't know, admitted Richard. In the last few months before the separation, I was so obsessed with the company's problems that I barely talked to her. Dad always came home very late, said Emily, and when Mom tried to talk, he said he was tired. Then Mom started crying a lot at night, added Sophie. We could hear her in the bedroom. Richard felt a tightening in his chest. He had been so consumed by the paranoia that someone was betraying his trust at the company that he ended up betraying his own family's trust. Girls, do you know if Mom found out anything about who was causing problems at Dad's company? The 2 girls exchanged glances once again, and Carol realized they knew something important. We can't tell, said Emily, biting her lower lip. Why not? Because Mom made us promise we would never tell anyone, explained Sophie. She said it could be dangerous. Richard's heart raced. What kind of situation had Margaret discovered, and why hadn't she shared it with him? Carol leaned forward, her experience handling tense situations guiding her. Girls, sometimes promises need to be broken when someone we love is suffering. Do you think Mom would want to know that Dad is going through troubles? She already knows, said Emily simply. What do you mean she already knows? Asked Richard. Because Mrs. Lucy, who works cleaning at your company, is Mom's neighbor, explained Sophie, and she tells her everything that happens there. Another revelation that left Richard stunned. Margaret was keeping up with his problems through the company's cleaning lady. And Mom also knows about the bad people, added Emily. What bad people? Sophie looked at Emily, who made a gesture with her head as if giving permission. Dr. Edward and Mrs. Patricia, said Sophie in a low voice. They're stealing company secrets. Richard felt the world spinning around him. Edward was his minority partner, and Patricia was the financial director. If that were true, it meant the 2 people he trusted most were responsible for the sabotage. How did Mom find this out? Asked Richard, trying to keep his voice calm so as not to scare the girls. She saw them talking secretly in the company parking lot when she went to pick you up one day, explained Emily. And then she asked Mrs. Keenty, Lucy, to keep an eye on them. Mrs. Lucy took pictures of them taking papers from your desk when you weren't there, completed Sophie. Carol was fascinated by the intelligence of this woman she had never met. Margaret had set up a discreet investigation operation to protect her husband, using simple but effective resources. "Why didn't Mom tell this to Dad?" asked Carol. "Because she tried," said Emily, tears returning to her eyes. "But Dad said she didn't understand anything about business and that he didn't want her meddling in his affairs." Richard remembered the conversation. Margaret had tried to warn him about Edward and Patricia, but he had interpreted it as jealousy or paranoia. He had been rude to her, saying she should worry about the house and the children, not the company. "So Mom decided to help the people who were being harmed," continued Emily, "like Mr. Jack and other employees who were fired for no reason. And Dad got angry when he found out," said Sophie. "I wasn't angry," protested Richard, but even as he spoke he remembered the argument. It had been a terrible fight. Richard had discovered that Margaret was giving money to fired employees and had accused her of sabotaging his efforts to control company costs. He hadn't even listened to her explanations. "Dad said Mum was betraying him," said Emily quietly, "and Mum cried a lot." "That's when she wrote the letter," completed Sophie. The puzzle was coming together in Richard's mind, and the image that emerged made him disgusted with himself. Margaret had discovered the true source of the company's problems, had tried to protect him and the innocent employees, and as a reward, had been accused of betrayal. Carol realized that Richard was processing information that completely changed his perspective of the last few months. "Mr. Thompson, when was the last time you spoke with your ex-wife?" "The day she left home," admitted Richard, "6 months ago." "And you girls? Do you talk with Mommy?" "Only in secret," confessed Emily. "She calls our friend Julie's house sometimes. And she always asks if Daddy is okay," added Sophie. Richard felt a physical pain in his chest. During all these months, he had assumed that Margaret had moved on, that she was happy away from him and the girls. The possibility that she still cared, that she still loved them, was both comforting and devastating. "Girls, would you like to see Mommy again?" asked Carol gently. "More than anything in the world," the two replied in unison, their voices filled with longing. Richard looked at his daughters as if he were seeing them for the first time in months. Their suffering was palpable, and he was finally understanding that it wasn't just about the move to Grandma's house. It was about the disintegration of everything they had known as a family. "Daddy, do you still love Mommy?" asked Sophie, with the brutal honesty that only children possess. The question echoed through the airplane cabin like a gunshot. Richard looked at his youngest daughter, then at Emily, who was watching him expectantly, and finally at Carol, who had become an unintentional witness to the most vulnerable moment of his life. "Yes," he answered, his voice breaking, "more than you can imagine." "Then why don't you get back with her?" asked Emily. "Because Daddy made a lot of foolish mistakes," admitted Richard, "and I don't know if Mommy can forgive me." Carol leaned forward, her expression gentle but determined. "Mr. Thompson, may I share something personal with you?" Richard nodded. 5 years ago, I almost lost my own family because of pride. My husband had made a mistake at his work, and instead of telling me, he tried to handle it alone. When I found out, I felt betrayed and left home with our children." The girls were paying full attention to Carol's story. "We spent 8 months apart. 8 lost months that we'll never get back. Do you know what brought us back together?" "What?" asked Emily. "An honest conversation, without pride, without fear, just truth. He admitted he was wrong not to trust me, and I admitted I was wrong not to give him a second chance." Richard absorbed every word. "Sometimes," Carol continued, "the people we love the most are the ones we hurt the most, because we think they will always be there. But love doesn't mean an absence of boundaries." "Does Mommy still love us?" asked Sophie. Carol smiled. "Girls, I'm going to tell you something, but it's a secret, okay?" The two nodded vigorously. "I know your Mommy." The impact of the revelation was immediate. Richard straightened up in his seat. The girls opened their mouths in surprise. "What do you mean you know Mommy?" asked Richard. "Margaret attends the same support group for separated mothers that I run in my neighborhood. She has been going there every Thursday for 4 months. Tears welled up in the girls' eyes again, but this time they were tears of hope. And does she talk about us? Asked Emily. She never stops talking, replied Carol with a smile. She brings photos of you to show everyone. And she cries every time someone asks if you're okay. Richard felt as if he were waking from a 6-month nightmare. She still cares about me. Carol hesitated for a moment. Mr. Thompson, Margaret cried when she found out you were having trouble at the company. She told me she wanted to help, but didn't know how, because you weren't talking anymore. Does she know I'm taking the girls to Lancaster? Yes, and she's desperate. The silence in the cabin was heavy, filled with regret and lost possibilities. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps those of us who are just starting out now continuing. Carol, said Richard, his voice trembling, do you think she would forgive me? I don't know, Carol answered honestly, but I know she still loves you 3 more than anything in life. Sophie got up from her seat and ran to her father, throwing herself into his arms. Daddy, are we going back to Mommy? Richard hugged his youngest daughter, feeling tears stream down his face. I don't know if it's that simple, Princess. Why not? Insisted Emily, also approaching. If everyone loves each other, why can't you be together? The simple question from a 10-year-old exposed the unnecessary complexity Richard had created in his mind. Because Daddy has to fix many things first, he explained. The company, the employees who were harmed. Mr. Thompson, interrupted Carol, may I make a suggestion? Of course. Why don't you call her now? Richard looked at the airplane phone, then at his daughters, who watched him expectantly. What if she doesn't want to talk to me? What if she does? Countered Carol. Emily took her father's hand. Daddy, Mommy always said that brave people do the right thing even when they're scared. Richard looked at his oldest daughter and saw Margaret reflected in her determined eyes. Okay, he said, picking up the phone with trembling hands, but you two will have to help me know what to say. Just tell the truth, said Sophie simply. Richard dialed the number he knew by heart, even after 6 months without using it. The phone rang once, twice. Hello? Margaret's voice on the other end made Richard's heart stop. Margaret? It's Richard. There was a long silence on the other end. Richard? Is everything all right? Are the girls okay? Yes, they're with me. Actually, we're flying to Lancaster. I know, said Margaret, her voice filled with sadness. Mrs. Catherine called me. Margaret, I need to talk to you about everything. I found out things. So about the company, about what you were trying to tell me. Richard, please, he interrupted, let me speak. I was wrong, very wrong, and not just with you, but with the girls too. Emily and Sophie were clinging to their father, listening to every word of the conversation. The girls think they're to blame for our separation, Richard continued, and I was so selfish I didn't even notice their suffering. They're not to blame, said Margaret, and Richard could hear she was crying. Never were. I know that now, and I also know you were right about Edward and Patricia, about everything. How did you find out? The girls told me. About your investigations, about how you were trying to protect me while I accused you of betraying me. Margaret sobbed on the other end of the line. Richard, I never wanted you to find out through them. I didn't want them to carry that burden. Margaret, can you forgive me? The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Richard, it's not about forgiveness, it's about trust. How can we rebuild something if you don't trust me? I want to learn. I want you to teach me how to trust again, how to be a better husband, a better father. Sophie took the phone from her father's hand. Mommy, it's Sophie. My love, how are you, Princess? I miss you so much. Me too, sweetheart. Every day. Emily also moved closer to the phone. Mommy, Daddy is crying. Is he? And he said he loves you more than anything. Girls, Margaret's voice was choked up. Would you like Mommy and Daddy to try to be a family again? Yes, they both shouted at once. Richard picked up the phone again. Margaret, where are you? At home. Our home. I never left here. The revelation was another blow to Richard's chest. All these months, she had stayed in the family home, waiting. Were you waiting for us? I was waiting for you, she admitted. For you to decide our family was worth fighting for. It is, said Richard without hesitation. It's worth everything. Carol, who had watched the whole conversation in silence, approached again. Mr. Thompson, may I speak with Margaret for a moment? Richard handed over the phone, curious. Margaret, it's Carol from the Thursday group. Carol, what are you doing there? I work as a flight attendant, remember? And apparently the universe decided I should be here today. Margaret laughed through her tears. You always said coincidences don't exist. And they don't. Margaret, this man is truly sorry. And these girls need their parents together. I know. I need him too. So what are you going to do? Richard took the phone back. Margaret, we're coming back to New York City. Now. But what about Mrs. Catherine? I'll call her and explain. The girls won't live with her because they don't need to. They'll live with their parents. And the company? We'll figure it out together, as it always should have been. Sophie tugged her father's shirt. Daddy, ask if Mommy still makes that chocolate cake. Richard smiled for the first time in months. Margaret, Sophie wants to know if you still make chocolate cake. I made one yesterday, replied Margaret, laughing. As if I knew you were coming back. Maybe you did, said Richard. Maybe you always knew we'd find our way back. After hanging up, Richard turned to Carol. How can I thank you? By taking care of that family, she replied, and maybe by inviting me over for a piece of that chocolate cake. The girls laughed, a sound Richard hadn't heard in a long time. Carol, do you have children? Asked Emily. I have 2 boys, Peter and John. Do they know you help families? They do, and they're proud of their mum. Sophie went up to Carol and hugged her. Thank you for helping our family. You're welcome, sweetie. Sometimes people just need someone to remind them what really matters. The pilot announced they had changed the flight's destination back to New York City, as requested by Richard. The businessman had made a few quick calls, cancelling the arrangements in Lancaster, and explaining to his mother-in-law that there had been a change of plans. For the rest of the flight, the girls told Carol about life before their parents' separation. They talked about Sundays at their paternal grandmother's house, about family trips, about how their father used to make pancakes for Saturday breakfast. Daddy used to make heart-shaped pancakes, said Sophie, excited for the first time that day. And Mommy used to sing while making coffee, added Emily. Richard listened to his daughter's memories with a mix of nostalgia and determination. He had lost 6 precious months of their childhood, but he wouldn't waste any more time. Carol, do you think people can really change? Asked Richard. I think people can grow, she replied, and I think true love makes room for growth. I'm afraid of disappointing them again. It's normal to be afraid. The important thing is not to let fear paralyze you. Emily approached her father. Daddy, are you really going to fire Dr. Edward and Mrs. Patricia? I am, and I'm going to apologize to all the employees who were treated unfairly, including Mr. Jack. Is he going to come back to work for you? If he wants to. After everything I've done, I don't know if he'll accept. Mommy said he still likes you very much, said Sophie. She said he was just sad, not angry. Richard shook his head, impressed by his ex-wife's wisdom in maintaining relationships he had destroyed through distrust. How is Mommy so wise? He asked, more to himself. Because she has a big heart, replied Emily simply. As the plane approached New York City, Richard's anxiety grew. 6 months of separation, 6 months of hurt and misunderstandings. Would it really be possible to rebuild what they had lost? Daddy is nervous, observed Sophie. A little, he admitted. Mommy must be too, said Emily. Carol smiled. You know what I've learned all these years working with people? The best reunions are those where everyone is nervous. It means it matters. LaGuardia Airport was busy as always when they landed. Richard had called his driver but decided he would drive himself home. He wanted to have this intimate moment with his daughters without intermediaries. In the car, the girls were excited, making 1,000 plans for when they got home. Let's watch movies together, said Sophie. And make popcorn, added Emily. And Daddy will make pancakes tomorrow morning, said Sophie, turning to him. You will, right, Daddy? I'll make the best pancakes you've ever had, promised Richard. New York City traffic was heavy, but for the first time in months Richard didn't mind. He was going home to his family. "Daddy, what if Mommy isn't there anymore?" asked Emily suddenly, a childish but understandable worry. "She's there," said Richard with conviction. "She promised she'd be waiting." "How do you know?" "Because I've known Mommy for 15 years, and she's never broken a promise to you." When they finally reached the condominium, Richard felt his heart race. The house had all the lights on, like in the old days when they returned from trips. "Look!" shouted Sophie, pointing to the living room window. "Mommy is at the window!" Richard parked the car, and the girls ran out before he even turned off the engine. He watched them climb the entrance stairs like little hurricanes of happiness. The door opened before they reached it, and Margaret appeared. She looked exactly as Richard remembered, but there was something different in her eyes, a mix of hope and caution. The girls threw themselves into their mother's arms, and the three hugged at the doorway, crying and laughing at the same time. Richard approached slowly, carrying the luggage, watching the scene he had dreamed of for months. When Margaret looked up and saw him, time seemed to stop. "Hi," he said, feeling like an awkward teenager. "Hi," she replied, her smile shy but genuine. Can I hug you?" Margaret nodded, and when Richard's arms wrapped around her, he felt he was finally truly home. "I'm sorry," he whispered in her ear. "Sorry for everything." "I'm sorry too," she replied, "for giving up the fight." "You didn't give up. You stayed. You waited." The girls pulled them apart, eager to go inside and make up for lost time. The house was exactly as Richard remembered, except for one thing. There were new photos of the girls everywhere. Photos that Margaret had taken from school social media, from family, from anywhere she could follow her daughter's growth from a distance. "I followed every moment," said Richard, looking at the pictures. "Every one I could," replied Margaret. "I missed everything, even the bath time arguments." Sophie pulled her parents by the hand. "Let's have dinner together, like before." "Of course, Princess," said Margaret. "Mommy made spaghetti and meatballs, your favorite." During dinner, the girls talked about the flight, about Carol, about how everything had changed in just a few hours. "Daddy cried on the plane," reported Emily. "Cried a lot," confirmed Sophie. Margaret looked at Richard with tenderness. "Crying is nothing to be ashamed of," she told the girls. "Daddy was feeling so many things at once." "And Mommy, did you cry too?" asked Sophie. "Every day," admitted Margaret. But now they're tears of happiness. After dinner, they settled in the living room to watch a movie, just like they used to. The girls squeezed between their parents on the sofa, as if wanting to make sure no one would leave. "Daddy," said Emily during the movie, "are you going to fix the company's problems tomorrow?" "We are going to fix them," corrected Richard, looking at Margaret. "Mommy and I together." "Are you sure you want to help me with this?" asked Margaret. "It might get complicated." "I'm sure I need your wisdom, I always have." The next morning, Richard woke up in the guest room. They had agreed to take things slow, to rebuild trust before rebuilding intimacy. But when he went down to the kitchen, he found Margaret making coffee and humming softly, exactly as Sophie had described. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she replied, offering him a cup. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months." The girls came running down shortly after, excited at the prospect of having their father make pancakes. "Daddy, where are the pancakes?" demanded Sophie. "I'll make them right now, Princess. What shape do you want?" "Hearts!" they both shouted. While Richard prepared breakfast, Margaret explained to the girls that they wouldn't be going to school that day. "Why not?" asked Emily. "Because Mommy and Daddy need to take care of some important things," explained Margaret. "And you'll be staying with Grandma Helen." "Daddy's mom?" asked Sophie, excited. "That's right, she misses you both terribly." Richard smiled. His mother had been devastated by the separation, but had respected his decision not to interfere. Now she would be overjoyed to know the family was coming back together. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like, and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a lot, as we're just getting started. Now, continuing. After leaving the girls with Mrs. Helen, Richard and Margaret went straight to the company. On the way, she showed him all the evidence she had gathered about Edward and Patricia. "How did you get all this?" asked Richard, impressed by the detailed investigation. "Mrs. Lucy is smarter than any detective," answered Margaret, "and the employees trusted me. They knew I cared about them as people, not just as numbers. I lost that, didn't I? The human connection. You didn't lose it. You just forgot about it for a while. It happens when we're under pressure." At the company, Richard gathered all the employees in the auditorium. He was nervous, but Margaret's presence by his side gave him courage. "Everyone, I need to talk to you about some important matters," he began. "First, I want to publicly apologize for the mistakes I've made these past few months." A murmur went through the auditorium. "I fired innocent employees based on false information. I let fear and distrust control my decisions, and I almost destroyed a company we built together." Jack was in the front row, watching intently. "I discovered that Edward Santos and Patricia Mendoza were sabotaging our contracts and selling information to competitors," Richard continued. "They are no longer with the company, and all the evidence has been turned over to the proper authorities." The employees began talking among themselves, processing the information. "Jack," said Richard, looking directly at his former right-hand man, "could you come up here, please?" Jack stood up hesitantly and approached the stage. "Jack, you were my most loyal employee for over 10 years, and I fired you based on lies and manipulations. There's no excuse for that," said Richard, his voice filled with emotion. "I'm offering you your job back with all benefits, including the wages you lost during these months." Jack looked at Richard, then at Margaret, who smiled encouragingly. "Boss," said Jack, "I accept, but on one condition." "What?" "That Mrs. Margaret becomes an official consultant for the company. She's the one who discovered the truth and protected all of us." The auditorium erupted in applause. The employees stood up, showing their support for the suggestion. Richard looked at Margaret, who was surprised and moved. "What do you think?" he asked. "I think it would be an honor," she replied. In the months that followed, the Thompson family went through a gradual process of rebuilding. Richard learned to balance work and family, while Margaret took on an active role in the company, focusing on employee well-being and creating a more humane work environment. The girls got back their family Sundays, their Saturday pancakes, and their movie nights. But more importantly, they saw their parents become true partners, not just in marriage, but in every aspect of life. Carol became a close friend of the family, regularly invited for dinner. She witnessed Richard's transformation from an obsessed businessman into a present father and a thoughtful husband. "You've changed a lot," Carol told Richard at one of these dinners. "I haven't changed," he replied, looking at Margaret and the girls. "I just remembered who I really was." The company thrived under the new joint management. The combination of Richard's business experience and Margaret's human sensitivity created an environment where employees felt valued and motivated. Edward and Patricia were prosecuted and convicted, but Richard found no satisfaction in their punishment. His focus was on rebuilding, not revenge. "Daddy," said Emily on one of those Sunday afternoons at Grandma Helen's house, "are you truly happy now?" "I am, my daughter. Happier than I've ever been in my life." "Why?" "Because I learned that having success means nothing if you don't have people to share it with." Sophie, always more direct, asked the question on everyone's mind. "When are you two getting married again?" Richard and Margaret looked at each other and laughed. "We never officially divorced," Margaret explained. "We just separated." "So you're still married?" asked Emily excitedly. "Technically, yes," replied Richard, "but we're thinking about having a new ceremony for you two to be our bridesmaids." The girls screamed with joy, already making plans for the dress and flowers. That night, when the children were asleep, Richard and Margaret talked in the garden of the house, watching the stars. "Do you regret anything?" he asked. "Giving up temporarily on fighting for our marriage," she replied. "And you?" "Taking so long to understand that you were on my side all along." "We're different now," observed Margaret. "Better?" "Wiser. More grateful. More united." They kissed under the starry sky of New York City, knowing they had found their way back not just to each other, but to the family they had almost lost. The vow renewal ceremony took place 6 months later, at an intimate party in Grandma Helen's garden. Emily and Sophie were the proudest bridesmaids in the world, and Carol was the special matron of honor, the person who had made it all possible. During the vows, Richard spoke about second chances and how sometimes we need to get lost to find what truly matters. Margaret spoke about forgiveness, unconditional love, and how a strong family can weather any storm. "I promise to be not just your husband but your partner in everything," said Richard. "In joy, in hardship, in dreams and in fears. And I promise to never give up on us again," said Margaret, "no matter how difficult the challenges may be." The girls applauded with tears in their eyes, finally certain that their family was whole again. During the party, Mrs. Helen pulled Richard aside. "My son, I am proud of you." "Why, Mother?" "For having the courage to admit you were wrong. Many men don't have that strength. I learned from you that true strength isn't about never falling, but always getting back up." The evening was perfect when Carol approached the family to say goodbye. "Thank you for letting me be part of this story," she said. "Thank you for saving our family," replied Margaret, hugging her. "I didn't save anything," said Carol. "I just helped you remember the love that had never died." Emily and Sophie hugged Carol tightly. "You will always be part of our family," said Sophie. "And you can eat chocolate cake here whenever you want," added Emily. Carol laughed, her eyes shining with tears of joy. "I'll hold you to that promise." 2 years later, the company Thompson and Daughter, as it had been renamed after Margaret became an official partner, was recognized as one of the best companies to work for in the United States. Richard and Margaret had created employee support programs, scholarships for their children, and a corporate environment based on trust and mutual respect. The girls, now 12 and 10 years old, were confident and happy children who understood the value of family and forgiveness. They often told their friends about how they almost lost their parents to a misunderstanding, but how love had won in the end. "Our family is special," Sophie told her friend Julie during an afternoon of play. "Why?" "Because we almost got lost, but we managed to find each other again. Daddy says that made us stronger." Emily, always more thoughtful, observed, "I think sometimes people need to be apart for a while to remember how much they love each other." At home, during another family Sunday, Richard watched Margaret helping the girls with a school project about American families. "What are you smiling about?" she asked, noticing his gaze. "I'm thinking about Carol," he replied. If it weren't for her, we would have eventually found our way," said Margaret. "Maybe it would have taken longer. Maybe we would have lost more precious time. But true love always finds a way." "Are you so sure?" "I am, because even in the most difficult moments, even when I was angriest with you, I never stopped loving you three." "Neither did I," admitted Richard. "I was just lost, not unloving." Sophie looked up from the school project. "Daddy, Mommy, can you help me with a question?" "Of course, Princess. What's the question?" "The teacher wants us to write about what makes a family happy." Richard and Margaret exchanged a glance, smiling. "What do you think makes a family happy?" asked Margaret. Sophie thought for a moment. "Talking when there's a problem, not keeping secrets, and always remembering you love each other, even when you're angry." "Perfect," said Richard, kissing his daughter's head. "Couldn't have said it better myself." Emily raised her hand as if in school. "Can I add something?" "Of course." "I think it's also important to have people like Carol in our lives. People who help us see things differently when we're too sad to see clearly on our own." Margaret was moved by her older daughter's wisdom. "You're right, sweetheart. Sometimes we need angels in disguise to show us the way." "Was Carol an angel?" asked Sophie, curious. "In her own way, yes," replied Richard. "A special person who came into our lives at the exact moment we needed them." That evening, after the girls had gone to sleep, Richard and Margaret sat in the garden, as they had done so many times since their reconciliation. "Have you ever wondered what our lives would be like if we hadn't found each other again?" asked Richard. "Sometimes," admitted Margaret. "But I prefer to think about what we have now, what we built from the rubble. Are we stronger now? We're more truthful. We learned that marriage isn't about never having problems, it's about facing problems together, and about trusting each other. Especially that. Richard took Margaret's hand and kissed it gently. If I could go back in time, do you know what I would change? What? Nothing, because everything we went through brought us here. And here is the most perfect place in the world. Margaret smiled, resting her head on her husband's shoulder. You know what I would change? What? Nothing too, because our suffering taught the girls about forgiveness, about struggle, about never giving up on true love. They're going to be amazing women. They are. And they'll know that family isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. 3 years had passed since the day on the airplane that changed everything. The Thompson family had become an example in their community, not of perfection, but of rebuilding and perseverance. Richard had transformed his company into a model of humanized management and was invited to speak about leadership and family relationships. Margaret had become a respected consultant, helping other companies create healthier work environments. But what they were most proud of were their daughters. Emily, now 13, was a confident teenager who mediated conflicts among her schoolmates with impressive wisdom for her age. Sophie, 11, had become known for her ability to make people smile even on the most difficult days. "Daddy," said Emily during a family dinner, "my friend Chloe is going through a situation like ours." "How so?" asked Richard. "Her parents are fighting a lot, and she thinks it's her fault, like we used to." "What did you tell her?" "I said that adult problems aren't the children's fault, and that sometimes parents need help to remember they love each other." Margaret smiled, proud of her oldest daughter's maturity. "And what else did you say?" "That if she wanted, I could ask you to talk to her parents. You know what it's like to get lost and find each other again." Richard looked at Margaret, who nodded discreetly. "Of course, sweetheart. If they want help, we're here." "Thank you, Daddy. Chloe will be so happy." Sophie, not wanting to be left out of the conversation, added, "And if it doesn't work, we can call Carol. She's an expert at fixing families." Everyone laughed at Sophie's innocent suggestion, but there was truth in it. Carol had become part of the extended family, joining all the important celebrations and keeping in regular touch with all of them. "Actually," said Margaret, "Carol is coming for dinner on Friday. How about inviting Chloe and her parents?" "Really?" the girls asked in unison. "Really?" replied Richard. "If they want to, of course." That Friday, the Thompson home welcomed Chloe's family. The girls' parents, Charles and Rebecca, arrived visibly tense but were greeted with the warm kindness that characterized the Thompson household. Carol had arrived early, as she always did, to help Margaret with dinner preparations and to chat with the girls about how much they had grown since the last time they saw each other. "You've changed so much," observed Carol, watching Emily and Sophie help set the table. "How so?" asked Sophie. "You're more mature, more sure of yourselves." "It's because our family is whole again," explained Emily. "When you know you have a safe place to return to, it becomes easier to be brave out in the world." Carol smiled, touched by the depth of the observation from a 13-year-old girl. During dinner, Charles and Rebecca initially kept to themselves, but the welcoming atmosphere of the house and the natural conversation of the Thompson family gradually helped them relax. "How did you manage to overcome your problems?" asked Rebecca during a moment of silence. Richard and Margaret exchanged glances. "Honesty," replied Richard, "and a genuine desire to change. But we also needed outside help," added Margaret, smiling at Carol. "Sometimes we're too caught up in the problem to see the solution. Couples therapy helped a lot," admitted Richard. "Learning to really communicate, not just talk, but listen too." Charles, who had remained quiet for most of the conversation, finally spoke. "We don't know how to talk anymore either. Everything turns into an argument." "We've been there," said Margaret gently. "We reached a point where any topic became a fight." "How did you get past it?" "First, by recognizing that we both wanted to save the marriage," explained Richard. "Then, by accepting that we needed professional help. And most importantly, remembering why we fell in love in the first place," Margaret finished. Carol, who had been quietly observing the conversation, leaned forward. "May I share something I learned while coordinating support groups?" Everyone nodded. "Most couples who separate don't fall out of love. They stop connecting. The difference might seem small, but it's huge. What do you mean? Asked Rebecca. Love is a feeling. Connection is a choice. You can love someone and still feel distant because you've stopped choosing to connect every day. Charles and Rebecca absorbed the words in silence. And how do we start connecting again? Asked Charles. Small daily gestures, replied Richard, asking how their day was and really listening to the answer, thanking them for the little things they do. And talking about dreams, not just problems, added Margaret, remembering that you're partners, not adversaries. Chloe, who had stayed quiet throughout the entire conversation, finally spoke. Mom, Dad, do you still remember when you were dating? The innocent question brought tears to the girl's parents' eyes. I remember, said Charles, looking at Rebecca. You used to wear that jasmine perfume that drove me crazy. And you used to sing in the shower, replied Rebecca, smiling for the first time that evening. Off-key, but you sang. I still have that perfume, she said softly. And I still sing in the shower, he replied, also smiling. Sophie clapped, excited by the tender moment between her friend's parents. See, she said, you still remember why you liked each other. The evening ended with Charles and Rebecca scheduling a couples therapy session and profusely thanking the Thompson family for their hospitality and advice. You gave us hope, said Rebecca as they said goodbye. You showed us that it's possible to rebuild, Charles finished. After the guests left, Carol helped the family clean up the kitchen. You know you've become a very special family, right? She said. Why special? Asked Emily. Because you use your own experience to help others. That's rare and beautiful. We learned that suffering is only worth it if we use it for something good, observed Sophie with her particular wisdom. Exactly, said Carol, and you turned your pain into purpose. That night, Richard and Margaret talked about how they felt about helping other families. I think we found our mission, said Margaret. What? Showing people that it's possible to start over, that mistakes aren't final. Would you like to formalize this? Maybe create a project at the company. That would be amazing. We could offer workshops for couples, support groups for families in crisis, and the girls could participate whenever they wanted. They have a unique perspective on all of this. They understood things that many adults couldn't, agreed Margaret. 6 months later, the company Thompson and Daughter launched the project New Beginnings Together, offering free support to families in crisis. The program included subsidized couples therapy, workshops on family communication, and a support group coordinated by Carol. The community response was overwhelming. Within weeks, there was a waiting list of families wanting to join the program. We had no idea there were so many families going through problems similar to ours, commented Richard during a project evaluation meeting. Maybe they always existed, replied Margaret, but people didn't talk about it openly. Now they do, observed Carol. You created a safe space for it. Emily and Sophie often participated in the workshops for children, sharing their experiences and helping other children understand they weren't to blame for their parents' problems. It's strange, Emily said to Sophie after one of these workshops, how our sad story turned into something that helps other people be happy. I think that's how life works, replied Sophie. Bad things sometimes lead to good things happening later. Do you think if we hadn't gone through all that, Dad and Mom would never have created the project? I don't know, but I think they wouldn't understand as much what other families go through. That's true. Now they really know what it's like to almost lose everything, and how good it is to recover. The girls' conversation was interrupted by Richard, who approached smiling. What are you two talking about? About how our almost broken family turned into a family that fixes other families, replied Sophie with her characteristic simplicity. Richard was moved by his youngest daughter's observation. You know you're the wisest girls I know. We learned from the best, said Emily, hugging her father. From you two and from Carol, added Sophie. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story of overcoming and family love. Do you believe it's possible to rebuild relationships after deep crises? Leave your comment sharing your opinion. And if this story touched your heart, don't forget to leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories like this one.